Across palaces and battlefields, a single family shaped Europe's fate and paid a private price written across their faces. The Habsburgs married cousin to cousin, aunt to nephew, generation after generation, to hold an empire together. Their gamble preserved power, but quietly magnified hidden genetic risks: a jutting jaw, fragile health, infertility, and minds burdened by illness. This isn't a spectacle. It's a human story at the intersection of medicine and monarchy. Tonight, with care and respect, we'll follow portraits like patient charts, meet rulers like patience, and ask what the Habsburg jaw really teaches about power, biology, and mercy today. If you value history told with heart and science, please like this video, subscribe, and share it with someone who loves learning. Leave a comment with your questions or family stories, and ring the bell so you won't miss our next deep, compassionate dive into medicine and the past together. Thank you for being here. Before we step into royal halls, I want to set a gentle intention: to treat the past with dignity. The phrase Habsburg jaw can sound sensational, even cruel, when it's tossed around without context. But if we approach it as clinicians and historians do, curious, compassionate, and careful, we uncover something deeper than a caricature. We find a case study about how personal choices, political pressures, and biological laws overlap. We find human lives. In medicine, every feature tells a story. A jaw that juts forward can reflect how the bones of the face grew in childhood, how teeth met, and how genes from both parents interacted. In history, every marriage contract tells a story too, of alliances, borders, wars avoided or provoked, and families trying to survive in a world that left them few choices. The Habsburgs did what many royal houses did. They married within a small circle to keep land, armies, and loyalty stable. The difference was how consistently and how closely they kept marrying relatives, especially in the Spanish branch of the family. This journey will walk gently along that border, part medical explanation, part historical narrative, part ethical reflection. We'll define the anatomy and genetics as clearly as possible. We'll meet emperors, queens, and children as people with hopes and heartbreaks. And we'll ask, when we pursue power at all costs, what costs do we pass down to the next generation? The Habsburg family began as counts in the Alpine heart of Europe, taking their name from a castle, Habsburg, in what is today Switzerland. Over centuries, through what they like to call fortunate marriages, they transformed into one of history's most powerful dynasties. By the 16th century, their domain stretched from Central Europe to the Low Countries, from Italian principalities to the enormous wealth of Spain and its vast overseas empire in the Americas and Asia. Their rise rested less on battlefield brilliance and more on an art form they perfected: dynastic marriage. A son or daughter wasn't simply a child. They were a diplomatic bridge. A wedding could trade a war for a ring, a siege for a dowry, a contested border for a new baby who united claims. And so the Habsburgs wove a web of relatives across Europe. Two branches mattered most in the era of the Habsburg jaw. The Austrian Habsburgs ruled the Holy Roman Empire and later the Austrian Empire. The Spanish Habsburgs ruled Spain and much of its empire. The bridge that connected them came through marriages that were, by modern standards, stunningly close. Double first cousins, uncle and niece, aunt and nephew. While the Austrian line certainly showed the famous jaw in portraits, the feature reached its most dramatic expression and its most serious health consequences in Spain. As we travel through time, let's place the Habsburgs where they belong. Not as villains, not as victims, but as people making choices within a system that rewarded short-term political security, even when the long-term biological risks were poorly understood or quietly ignored. To understand why the Habsburgs kept marrying relatives, think about the incentives. If you're a 16th century monarch, your enemies watch every border, and your allies can switch sides overnight. Marrying a foreign princess from a rival house might solve a problem, but it can also hand your enemies a foothold inside your family. Marrying within your own clan, by contrast, keeps your assets in-house. Lands stay consolidated, loyalties remain predictable, and claims to thrones become stronger and simpler to argue. This strategy made sense politically, and it wasn't unique to the Habsburgs. European nobility lived in a small social pool. Cousins and second cousins weren't unusual matches. But the Habsburgs doubled down. They repeated close consanguineous marriages over several generations, especially in Spain. An uncle marrying a niece might secure a contested crown. A double first cousin match, where spouses share both sets of grandparents, might keep two enormous estates from breaking apart. At the time, the church could grant dispensations for close-kin marriages, and the pressure to produce a legitimate heir often trumped concerns about heredity. Remember, modern genetics did not exist. People knew that illness could run in families, but they lacked a framework to quantify risk. In the calculus of kings and councils, the immediate certainty of a united empire outweighed the invisible mathematics of probability. And yet, biology keeps its own ledger. With each close-kin union, the chance that two copies of a harmful recessive trait would meet in a child rose. Over decades, the Habsburgs built political moats and quietly bred medical bottlenecks. The jaw we see in portraits is the most memorable sign, but it was only part of a larger, accumulating burden. The word inbreeding can sting. In medicine, we try to use it precisely and without judgment. It simply means mating between individuals who are more closely related than average for a population. The concern is statistical. Relatives share more DNA, so there's a higher chance a child will inherit two copies of the same variant, especially if that variant is rare and potentially harmful. We quantify this with the inbreeding coefficient, often written as F. It's a number from 0 to 1 that estimates the probability a person has two copies of a gene segment, because both came from the same ancestor. To make it concrete, the child of unrelated parents has an F near 0. The child of first cousins has an F of about 0.0625. Uncle-niece or aunt-nephew pairings produce children with F around 0.125. Sibling or parent-child unions lead to F of 0.25. Why does this matter? Many medical conditions are recessive. They require two copies of a non-working gene to cause disease. In a large, diverse mating pool, two carriers of the same rare variant are less likely to meet. In a small, closed pool, especially with repeated close-kin pairings, the odds climb. Beyond single gene disorders, increased homozygosity, two identical copies, can reveal subtle risks: reduced fertility, higher infant mortality, increased infections, and developmental differences. The effect isn't destiny, it's probability sharpening its pencil. The Habsburgs illustrate the math. Over generations, their repeated consanguineous marriages appeared to raise F for some individuals to levels associated with serious health issues. In the Spanish branch, one king's estimated coefficient rivaled that of a child of siblings, astonishing for a legitimate line maintained over centuries. Let's talk anatomy. The Habsburg jaw is shorthand for a constellation of facial features most physicians would describe more specifically. The technical term often used is mandibular prognathism. The lower jaw, mandible, extends forward relative to the upper jaw, maxilla, causing an underbite. In many Habsburg portraits, we also see mid-face retrusion, a relatively underdeveloped upper jaw, making the lower jaw look even more prominent. Add in a long, narrow face, sometimes a lower lip that turns outward, and you have the classic look. Several forces shape our faces. Genetics play a large role, but growth patterns, muscle function, breathing patterns in childhood, and dental development matter too. In most people with an underbite, no single gene explains it. It's a complex polygenic trait influenced by many genes. In certain families, though, a strong predisposition does run through generations, suggesting a heritable component with high penetrance. The Habsburgs may have carried variants that favored this facial growth pattern, and their limited genetic pool likely concentrated those variants. Clinically, a pronounced underbite can affect chewing, speech, jaw joint comfort, and dental health. Today, Orthodontics and surgery can correct severe cases with excellent results. In the 16th and 17th centuries, such options didn't exist, but it's important to emphasize, having an underbite does not make a person unhealthy by default. Many people with prognathism live full, healthy lives. In the Habsburgs, the jaw was vivid and memorable, but it was part of a broader medical picture shaped by their marriage choices. We often rely on portraiture to diagnose the Habsburgs because cameras weren't around and medical records were sparse or politicized. Painters like Titian, Rubens, and Velázquez were masters, and their works act like time-stamped snapshots of rulers' faces. But we must be cautious. Portraits aren't MRIs. They're negotiations between sitter, artist, and courtly fashion. Artists were paid to flatter, or at least to respect, the dignity of a monarch. At the same time, the Habsburg jaw appears so consistently across multiple artists, regions, and decades that it's unlikely to be pure stylistic flourish. When we see the same underbite and facial proportions in independent depictions, paintings, medals, engravings, across different sitters who share a family tree, it strengthens the case that we're observing a real, heritable trait. Modern researchers have attempted to quantify these features from portraits using facial ratios and angles, then correlate them with genealogical data. While the methods have limits, the general picture holds. The degree of mandibular prognathism in the Spanish Habsburgs seems to intensify over time and correlates with how closely related the parents were. So yes, let's look at the paintings, but let's also read letters, examine autopsy notes where they exist, and study alliances inked on parchment. Together, they form a patient chart of a dynasty, rich, imperfect, and profoundly human. If we begin near the year 1500 with Emperor Maximilian I, we see a family still building its brand. In many portraits, Maximilian's jaw does not dominate his face. His grandson, Charles V, ruler of the Holy Roman Empire in Spain, takes us closer to the archetype. Titian's portraits of Charles show a prominent lower jaw, a heavy lower lip, and a long face. Accounts mention that he had difficulty closing his mouth fully. Charles also suffered from gout and other ailments. He was a hard-working ruler under immense pressure in a tumultuous age. Charles V married his first cousin, Isabella of Portugal. Their son, Philip II of Spain, inherited both a global empire and clearer signs of the facial pattern. Philip II's portraits often show a more pronounced underbite and narrow face. The family line at this point already carried consanguineous ties, but the Spanish branch would intensify them in coming generations. Keep in mind, the early Habsburgs were not uniquely diseased. Many noble families intermarried, and many healthy people today share similar facial features. What makes the Habsburg story striking is the accumulation, decade by decade, marriage by marriage, of genetic similarity within a small pool. Like a glass of water with a little salt added each time, the taste grows stronger with every stir. By Charles V's era, the glass had a noticeable flavor. The decisions his descendants made would pour in more. Philip II married 4 times. His wives included his first cousin once removed, and in one match, his own niece. Marriages that aligned with Habsburg strategy. In his later portraits, the jawline and lower lip are apparent. He was a complex figure, devout, meticulous, burdened by the vastness of empire. Under him, Spain reached political heights and began to feel the stresses of overextension. Philip III, his son, married Margaret of Austria, his first cousin once removed, and crucially, a Habsburg on both sides. In their children's faces, we begin to see the trait consolidate. This marriage also exemplifies a feedback loop. When two people who share multiple ancestors have children, inherited traits, good, bad, or neutral, can become more consistent in the descendants. Philip IV, perhaps most famously captured by Velázquez, continued the pattern by marrying his niece Mariana of Austria. Their portraits, solemn, refined, and poignant, display the long Habsburg face and pronounced lower jaw. Philip IV lived through political disappointments, military losses, and court intrigues. The Spain of his reign struggled with financial crises and military exhaustion. In a sense, the dynasty's biological risks and the empire's political risks ran on parallel tracks, each a slow burn, each papered over in the short term, each harder to ignore as the years wore on. And then came a child who would carry the highest burden of both tracks. Charles II, son of Philip IV and Mariana of Austria, was born in 1661. From a medical perspective, he is the most striking example of what sustained consanguinity can do when chance is unkind. Portraits show an extreme underbite, a long, narrow face, and a lower lip that protrudes. Contemporary reports describe difficulties with chewing and speech. He walked late, spoke late, and suffered frequent illnesses. He married twice but had no surviving children. Physicians then and now have debated what conditions he may have had. Some propose endocrine disorders that affected growth and sexual development. Others suggest a combination of genetic problems, possibly including immune deficiencies that made infections more common. A few scholars analyzing his ancestry argue that his inbreeding coefficient, the probability that a gene segment in him came from the same ancestor through both parents, was extraordinarily high, comparable to the child of siblings. If true, this helps explain why multiple vulnerabilities might have coincided in one person. It is painful and important to say, Charles was not a punchline. He was a human being who, by all accounts, wanted to fulfill his role and found his body a frequent obstacle. He inherited an empire in trouble and a biology that made governing harder. When he died childless in 1700, the Spanish Habsburg line ended, and Europe plunged into the War of the Spanish Succession to decide who would take the crown. Biology didn't single-handedly topple Spain. But Charles's health made a precarious situation much more fragile. The Habsburgs' challenges went beyond facial structure. Infertility, difficulty conceiving or carrying pregnancies to term, appears repeatedly in the Spanish branch. In close kin unions, the risk of recessive causes of infertility can rise, and more subtle issues like increased miscarriage rates can appear. Palace letters, sanitized and politicized as they were, still hint at the heartbreak of hoped-for heirs who never arrived. What about madness? It's a word shaped by centuries of stigma. Some Habsburgs were described as melancholic, withdrawn, or erratic. But reading those accounts demands caution. Monarchs lived under crushing expectations, courtly factions weaponized rumors, and medical language was imprecise. That said, certain neurodevelopmental and psychiatric conditions do have genetic components, and increased homozygosity can influence their prevalence. In a small genetic pool, risks that were individually modest could become more likely to cluster. Immune function also matters. If a family concentrates variants that impair the immune system, even slightly, repeated infections can become a theme. In an era without antibiotics or vaccines, that could be devastating. Add nutritional swings from courtly fasting and feasting, stress, and the health hazards of travel, and you have a recipe for frequent illness even in the hands of the most attentive physicians of the day. The picture is not one of a cursed bloodline, but of probabilities compounded across generations. The Habsburgs were not uniquely doomed by fate. They were people whose strategic choices, mixed with genetic chance, created a pattern of health challenges that became harder to ignore with each new royal cradle. Let's return to the numbers. If you place a family tree on a wall and trace how often branches loop back to the same names, you can estimate inbreeding coefficients across generations. For many European nobles, occasional cousin marriages elevated those numbers slightly. The Habsburgs, especially in Spain, saw their F values climb in a staircase pattern, small rises with each cousin match, larger jumps with uncle-niece unions, and so on. By Charles II's time, some genealogists estimate his F around 0.25, meaning roughly a 1 in 4 chance that a gene segment was identical through both parents because of a shared ancestor. That's the same ballpark as the child of siblings. Even if the exact number is debated, the trend is clear. Repeated close kin marriages compound. What do these numbers mean for health? Population studies in modern settings suggest that as F rises, so does the risk of infant mortality, congenital anomalies, and reduced fertility. The increase is not uniform. It depends on which harmful variants happen to be present in the family. That's why some communities with high consanguinity rates can be relatively healthy for many generations, until a particular recessive condition appears and spreads. For the Habsburgs, a facial growth pattern likely interacted with other traits. The jaw itself may have been influenced by multiple genes, some additive, some dominant, perhaps a few recessive factors. Meanwhile, a cluster of recessive risks, affecting hormones, immunity, or development, could have gathered. The result wasn't guaranteed disaster. It was a loaded dice cup rolled again and again. It's tempting to point to a jawline and declare that biology toppled a superpower. Real history is more layered. Spain's decline long preceded Charles II's passing. Economic pressures, like inflation driven by New World silver, heavy taxation, and the cost of sustained warfare, ground down prosperity. Military overreach, naval losses, and administrative rigidities compounded troubles. The 30 Years' War, revolts in the Netherlands and Catalonia, and shifting trade patterns all played roles. What biology did was remove options. A healthy, fertile monarch could have produced multiple potential heirs, allowing for smoother succession or strategic marriages to rebalance power. A king with robust stamina might have traveled more, negotiated more deftly, or held factions in check, though even the healthiest ruler can be outmaneuvered by events. When Charles II died without an heir, his will named a Bourbon, Philip of Anjou, as successor. The result was a continent-wide crisis, the War of the Spanish Succession. It reshaped borders, deepened rivalries, and ushered in Bourbon rule in Spain, ultimately modernizing parts of the state. The Habsburgs continued in Austria, later transforming into the Austro-Hungarian Empire. So the dynasty didn't disappear, but a mighty branch with distinct traits, including that famous jaw, closed its chapter. Biology wasn't the author of Spain's fate, but it wielded a pen on a crucial page. We owe the Habsburgs and anyone who lives with a visible difference care in how we speak. It's easy to reduce people to a single feature and forget their minds, hopes, and duties. For centuries, individuals with facial differences have faced cruel jokes or social exclusion. As clinicians, we try to reverse that harm. We treat the person, not the profile. When we talk about madness, we should translate it into modern terms: mental health, neurodevelopmental differences, and remember how far our understanding has come. A child who speaks late deserves support, not labels. An adult with depression or anxiety deserves treatment, not whispers in corridors. The Habsburgs lived without the benefits of contemporary medicine or the vocabulary of compassion we strive to use today. There's also a cautionary note about how we read the past. Scientific curiosity is good. Turning people into puzzles is not. The goal is empathy, to see how structures, political, familial, biological, shaped lives. If their story moves us to be kinder toward those with differences today, then we have honored them better than 1,000 casual jokes ever could. Finally, remember spelling. You may see Habsburg or Habsburg in sources. Habsburg is the standard modern spelling, but both refer to the same family. However we spell it, the lesson is the same. Power can't outrun biology, and biology should never outrun compassion. Today, genetic counseling offers families tools the Habsburgs didn't have. In communities where cousin marriage is traditional, counselors can estimate risks, offer carrier screening, and plan care for healthy pregnancies. Many consanguineous couples have healthy children. The goal is informed choice, not judgment. It's also worth clarifying, mandibular prognathism is not a Habsburg-only trait. It appears in all populations at varying frequencies. In most people, it's polygenic and influenced by environment. In a large, diverse population, traits disperse. In a small, closed population, they concentrate. The Habsburgs reduced the size of the pool and stirred it in predictable directions. Research analyzing portraits and pedigrees has found correlations between inbreeding coefficients and the intensity of facial features in the Habsburgs. But correlation is not destiny. Modern treatments, from orthodontics in childhood to orthognathic surgery in adulthood, can correct severe underbites with excellent functional and cosmetic results. If a child today looks like a Habsburg painting, they are not fated for ill health. Genes aren't a sentence, they're a starting point for personalized care. Finally, genetics humbles us. Even with powerful tools, predicting how multiple traits interact in a single person remains complex. The right posture is curiosity paired with humility, to keep learning while remembering that every genome is carried by a person who deserves respect. Biology loves variation. In evolution, genetic diversity is a kind of insurance policy against the unexpected. In human health, diversity spreads risk. Rare, harmful variants are less likely to meet, and populations adapt better to changing environments and pathogens. When a family or community reduces the pool through isolation, founder effects, or repeated close-kin marriages, certain traits become more common, for better or worse. Sometimes this reveals new strengths. A community might develop resilience to a local disease. Sometimes it exposes vulnerabilities. A recessive disorder can become prevalent, as seen in well-studied founder populations around the world. The Habsburgs show what happens when social pressure shrinks choice. They weren't trying to defy nature, they were trying to secure borders. But across generations, those political calculations quietly narrowed the genetic palette. When the harsh spotlight of the 17th century, war, disease, and court intrigue, turned on, the limits showed. In our lives today, diversity isn't just a social value, it's a health value. It applies to ecosystems, cities, and, yes, families. It doesn't mean judging traditions. It means bringing good information to the table so people can decide what balance of values, cultural continuity, personal choice, medical risk, fits their hopes. Let's return briefly to the artists who unknowingly kept a medical record. Titian's Charles V, armored and resolute, looks not unlike a patient asked to sit still for a lateral cephalometric radiograph. Chin forward, profile crisp. The jaw juts, the lower lip curves outward, the mid-face withdraws a step. Rubens paints Philip IV with elegance and gravity, the features softened but unmistakable. Velázquez, the poet of Spanish realism, gives us the most honest and tender portraits. Philip IV in sober black, little infantas dressed like lanterns, and Charles II pale and solemn, a child in a palace too large for his small, weary frame. The painter's eyes tell the same story as the genealogist's charts, yet notice how respectfully they paint. The gaze is steady, not cruel. The goal is not to exaggerate, but to present. In that spirit, we too can look steadily and kindly. The Habsburg jaw is real, and so are the achievements, failures, loves, and griefs of those who wore it. If you ever visit a museum and meet these faces, try looking at them as both art and case study. Ask yourself, what did it feel like to chew, to speak, to sit for hours while a painter captured your features and your fate? Imagine a modern clinic where a teenager arrives with an underbite like those in the portraits. The team, orthodontist, maxillofacial surgeon, speech therapist, works together. They map growth, plan braces to guide teeth and jaws, and, if needed, schedule surgery at the right age. Breathing, sleep, and jaw joint health are part of the conversation. The patient's goals, comfort, confidence, function, drive decisions. Imagine another family worried about a genetic condition. A counselor draws a family tree, listens to values, and discusses options. Carrier testing, prenatal screening, or simply watchful waiting with a plan. The tone is never "don't do this." It's "here is what we know, how can we support your choices?" This is how we make sure the Habsburg story educates without shaming. We use science to illuminate risks and empathy to guide care. We remember that what once seemed like fate is now a series of solvable challenges, when we have information, access, and respect. And for those who carry visible differences, we cultivate kindness in ourselves and in our communities. A face with a strong jaw is a face. A person is never a diagnosis. There's a leadership lesson here too. The Habsburgs valued stability so fiercely that they locked their options into a shrinking box. In the short run, it worked. Lands stayed aligned, enemies were held at bay. In the long run, it sabotaged resilience. One unexpected illness, one childless marriage, one fragile heir, and the entire structure trembled. Good leaders, whether of families, companies, or countries, build redundancy and diversity. They plan for succession. They invite new ideas and new people into the circle. They adjust strategies when the environment changes. Biology teaches the same principle. Variety is resilience. So, when we tell the Habsburg story, we're not just telling a medieval cautionary tale. We're reminding ourselves that stability built on narrowing choices is fragile. Stability built on diversity and adaptability endures. If a dynasty with a world-spanning empire could be humbled by the quiet arithmetic of genetics, then any leader can be humbled by the quiet arithmetic of ignoring warning signs, whether those signs are in balance sheets, ecosystems, or bodies. A few quick clarifications help keep the conversation honest. First, the Habsburgs were not uniquely deformed. They concentrated a common facial trait through consanguinity. The jaw became a symbol, but many people outside the family have similar features without health problems. Second, inbreeding does not always produce catastrophic outcomes. Risk rises with consanguinity, but outcomes vary based on the specific variants in the family and the environment. Many consanguineous families have healthy children, especially with guidance. Third, Charles II was not simply mad. He likely had a cluster of medical issues, endocrine, neurological, immunological, that we would treat differently today, and descriptions by contemporaries reflect stigma and politics as much as diagnostic precision. And finally, genetics did not single-handedly seal Spain's fate. It constrained options while war, economy, and governance did the rest. As we discuss, language matters. When we say Habsburg jaw, let's mean a historical shorthand, not a slur. When we say inbreeding, let's mean a statistical concept, not an insult. When we say decline, let's remember people living through it, doing their best with the tools they had. Picture a corridor in the royal palace of Madrid, portraits lined like windows into other lives, a child king with solemn eyes, a queen in shimmering silk, an emperor with heavy jaw and heavier responsibility. If we could whisper through time, what would we say? Perhaps, you did not know what we know. You tried to preserve what you loved. You paid a price you couldn't count. We see you. We don't mock you. We learn from you. And perhaps they would whisper back, do not repeat our error of narrowing your circle when the world asks for openness. Do not confuse purity with strength. Do not ignore the quiet warnings written in the bodies of those you love. In the end, the Habsburg jaw is a reminder that power cannot escape biology, and biology cannot escape our responsibility to each other. When we widen our circles, inform our choices, and care for those who are different with tenderness, we write a kinder story than the one painted on those palace walls. Thank you for walking this path with me, carefully, respectfully, and with hearts open to both science and the human story it illuminates. If this journey stirred questions or memories, I'd be honored to hear your thoughts. What surprised you most about the Habsburg story? How do you think we can balance tradition, power, and health with compassion? If you feel comfortable, share any family experiences with inherited traits or medical histories. Your perspective may help someone else feel less alone. Please keep the conversation gentle and respectful. Curiosity over judgment, people before diagnoses. Which lesson feels most relevant today? Leadership and succession, genetic counseling, or the power of diversity? And if you could ask one Habsburg a single question, what would it be? Thank you for spending this time together. I read your comments and learn from them. If you're not sure what to say, a simple listening or one sentence about how the story made you feel is more than enough. Be well, take good care of yourself and those you love, and I'll see you in the next video.